We are here every Wednesday, 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network, as well as TuneIn Radio. Search Sports Byline. If you don't have an affiliate in your area, TuneIn Radio, Sports Byline. YouTube at f4wonline.com/YouTube, and Twitch, twitch.tv/F4W Video. We got a very special show here today. Several weeks ago, we were attempting to interview Dr. Gilbert Lavoie of Shroud Studies about the Shroud of Jesus, which is the name of his book, The Shroud of Turin. And unfortunately, that was a day that maybe it was T-Mobile. There was an outage. There was a telephone outage, and we attempted to connect to him online, and then that didn't go well. Got about half of the show, maybe less, before it just didn't work anymore. So today, it is a redo. Dr. Gilbert Lavoie is going to be joining us after the break. We'll be talking the Shroud of Turin and plenty more. If you would like to text us any questions for the show today, you're welcome to do so, 425-780-7566. That is 425-780-7566. Bryan at AfterDarkRadioshow.com is the email. That is Bryan at AfterDarkRadioshow.com. I'm F4W Online at Threads, Instagram, and Cameo, at Bryan Alvarez on X and Blue Sky. That will be the show this week. We will have another show next week and then a week off. I will be on vacation, a rare vacation. But in the meantime, we got a lot of After Dark. I did not go down to Squatch Fest this past weekend, unfortunately. It was actually an hour further away than I thought, which would have been a 5-hour round trip on the same day that I had to report on the Royal Rumble. So unfortunately, I could not make it. I was very sad about that, but maybe next year we'll give it a shot. But anyway, sorry we can't talk about that, but we've got a lot to talk about with Gilbert Lavoie here on the show today. So stick around, everybody. After the break, we shall kick it off. After Dark Radio here on the Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. We are back here on the show. Bryan Alvarez here, After Dark Radio. Very happy today to be joined by Dr. Gilbert Lavoie, Shroud Studies, the Shroud of Jesus. We had you on the show several weeks ago, but Verizon had some issues, and, well, the show didn't work out the way we wanted. So this is what's called a redo. Dr. Lavoie, how you doing today?
Very good. Thank you very much for having me back with you, Bryan. I appreciate that.
Well, I think we should get started here today. We're gonna go as if we didn't do a show a couple of weeks ago, in case we have new listeners or the like. So we're gonna start here at the very beginning. Tell everybody, what is the Shroud of Turin?
Well, the Shroud of Turin is a cloth that is about 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide, and on that cloth is the very faint image of the front and back of a naked man who's been other than the image, we have blood marks that are consistent with what we read about in the Gospel of John. Exactly everything that we see in the Gospel of John regarding the passion and crucifixion of Jesus is right on that cloth. And so that alone really gives us the information that tells us that John really saw this cloth. For everything that's on there is he witnessed to, and everything that he witnessed to is on there. It's amazing. Now, also on that cloth are sort of two parallel strips that parallel the body on each side. Those are burn marks. Those occurred in 1352, and they occurred in Chambéry, France, in a fire in a chapel. And unfortunately, the men came in and they threw water on the silver casket, but these burn marks remained. But it's been we know that it's been in the West since around the 1300s, and it's now in Turin, Italy. It belonged to the House of Savoy until around somewhere in the middle 1980s, and then it was given to the Pope. So now the Catholic Church has it for the first time officially. It has a pre-1300 history as well. That goes all the way back to the time of Christ. From the point of view of legends, legend of Abgar, as we know that there was a cloth such as this in Constantinople around the 10th to the 12th century, and it disappeared when Constantinople was sacked by the Crusaders, and then it disappeared for about 150 years, and then was found in Leary, France. So that's the shroud. That's sort of a little bit of its history. Many have believed that it's the Shroud of Christ. It became an interesting factor in the world of science in 1898 with the invention of photography. The first picture of the shroud was taken, and when that was done, that changed the perspective totally. Other than just being a faint image, when the photographer Secundapia took a photograph of this shroud, when he went into his dark room, in those days they had these big glass plates, and when he went into his dark room to develop the film, he noted that what he saw on the negative plate was the positive image of a man, and he believed that he was seeing the face of Jesus for the very first time. And that's something one has to really take a look at. It's something, basically, he didn't understand why there would be a positive image on a negative plate. Then he realized that what was on the original cloth was a negative image. And the question is, how could a negative image get onto an ancient cloth? And and because of that, that information sort of went around the world. Scientists became interested, and people started to study the shroud from that time on. That's sort of a quick rundown on the shroud, and what fascinated people is this magnificent image that we now see in the negative.
So what do you know as far as the very first reference historically ever to the Shroud of Turin? You mentioned it had been like 11th and 12th centuries. There had been a little bit of writing allegedly about it. How far back have you been able to go where you can say, I believe that this right here is a reference to the Shroud?
Well, I think when I had traveled into Russia, and I saw a number of icons with regard to the story of Abgar. I mean, I'm not saying that that's when I say I believe that's exactly what happened, but there seems to be a certain amount of information there that has carried on, way back, from way back. And that story basically is that Jesus laid his body on the cloth, and that an image took place, and then that was brought over by to King Abgar, who wanted to meet Jesus. Anyway, when he got the cloth, he kept it for years, and then what happened is they buried it, in the wall of the city of Urfa, which is a town called Urfa today. And it was Edessa, called Edessa then. And about the 5th century, the cloth, they discovered that cloth in the wall. And then people from Constantinople wanted it, and they came down and retrieved it. And then we have some documentation, probably in the 10th century, that's pretty convincing that this is very likely the shroud. Because of the description of what they had to say in those documents. So I think I go back to maybe the 10th century, where we really get a feel for somebody really writing and describing it. Plus the fact that there were icons made that go all the way back to and coins that go all the way back to the 6th century, that have a lot of resemblance to the man of the shroud, the face of the man of the shroud. So there are pieces of information that are there that bring you all the way back. The reason why the big question is lots of people don't say, well, the shroud is never mentioned in the Gospels. And one of the things that I discovered that I think is very important with regard to the understanding why there was never mentioned in the Gospel is that that if it had been mentioned, for example, by John in his Gospel, John, being a Jew, would have understood that anything with an image upon it would be considered an idolatrous object because it had the hand or face or foot of man. The Jews knew that if they ever saw that anything like that, that it would be considered an object of idolatry, and it should be destroyed and thrown into the Dead Sea. So that's what would have happened. So John, when he saw the shroud, and that's part of what I've done and investigated with regard to the Gospel of John. I have 6 chapters on the Gospel of John related to the shroud, is that he would have understood that he could never write about it openly, but he does write about it secretly. And that's part of the investigation that's found in my book, The Shroud of Jesus, and the sign John ingeniously concealed. That's a very exciting part of the detective story that I tell in this book, The Shroud of Jesus. And that brings us, so between, not only are the blood marks consistent with what he talks about that we see in the shroud, but the discovery of the way that he ingeniously tells us that he saw this shroud, and that's where we're at.
Now, 1898, the first photograph was taken, and obviously once the photograph was out, I mean, it sure made national or international headlines all over the world, this photo. And prior to 1898, I mean, was this a local legend? Was this something that the story of the shroud kind of spread around the world? Were there drawings that people had made? I mean, what was the...
Oh, yes, there were.
Yes.
I mean, if you wanted to get into the history, you go to Leary. It starts in Leary, France, and where they, in the 1350s, Geoffrey de Chauny, he had they developed a little. It was a church that they developed there, and they showed the shroud there. Then there was an argument at that time whether this was a painting or not, and one of the bishops claimed that there was a man that he had witnessed the fact that he knew of a man who said that this was a painting. And so there's been a controversy since that time. But regarding it being a painting or a forgery, of course, there were a lot of sort of replicas made of that particular shroud over the years. And but they're very obviously just obvious paintings and so forth. But the shroud itself was venerated through the centuries until even up till today, and in different times. It was at first in Leary, France, and then it was in Chambéry, France, and then it was in Turin. So over those centuries, there's been different periods of time when people venerated the shroud and came to the shroud and were very interested in that cloth as the burial cloth of Jesus. But it really became famous worldwide once the photograph was taken by Secunda Pia in 1898. So that's so that's the basic. In other words, it's been in the West since the 13th century, or 1350s, and but it's gotten more and more press, and today it's gotten more press than ever.
Now, on the show, the last time you were on, you were talking about the image itself, and how it is not, the image does not, I guess, leak into the fabric like it would if it were a painting. It's basically,
Right.
it's an
Yeah,
image.
that's a
Yeah,
yes, you're right.
explain the difference between a painting and the image that is on the shroud.
Okay, one of the major differences is that if it were a painting and it was folded and rolled up as many times as it had been, because it's just a cloth that was rolled and folded in different over the years, there'd be the wearing away of that paint, and there'd be obvious areas that would be missing and whatever. You don't have any of that. It just is sort of a gross looking at a painting. If you did that to a painting on a cloth, that's what would happen. But you have none of that. So the image is very, very unique. It's only on the very top fibers of the cloth. And to make that clear, is that a thread, the material is actually flax. It's a flax material, and it's made of the flax plant. And the flax plant has very, very tiny fibers, and those fibers are used to make threads for the cloth. So in each thread there are hundreds or 100 or more fibers, and each one of these fibers is way less than half the diameter of the hairs on your head. Very, very tiny fibers, the width of them, very, very tiny. And it's these fibers that carry the image. They are the backbone of the image. Now, if you took a pin and pushed the fibers around, you would find that the yellowed cellulose, that's what the material is cellulose. The yellowed cellulose only, which causes the image, goes down only one fiber deep. In other words, way less than half the diameter of the hairs of your head. That image only goes down that deep into the cloth. Maybe there's places it goes 2 fibers, but most of it is 1 fiber deep. That's opposed to the blood marks. The blood marks are basically a natural event that we totally understand, that the blood on the body, for example, moist clotted blood on the body, the cloth would have, when the body was taken down, the cloth would have was placed upon these moist clots, and actually soaked through all the way to the back of the shroud. You can see the blood marks on the back. You can't see any image on the back, and because it's only superficially on the front. Now, no one has. You can the fibers are sort of, why are they yellowed? Well, heat, light, and acid can cause the yellowing of these fibers, but no one has ever created this image. Nobody's ever created it in the whole world. People have attempted to recreate it at this microscopic level. It's never been done.
So basically, you're saying all of the different shrouds that people have forged over the years, nobody has yet been able to recreate the image exactly like the one on the actual shroud.
That's exactly right. And at this microscopic level, no one has been able to do that. It's absolutely unique. And so, with all the technology we have today, it still hasn't been done. And there are many hypotheses that are out there of how this happened, but we really don't have the full answer of how it happened. We don't even have the full answer of how this cloth that was originally draped around the body, how that transferred the cloth to give us a nice, neat, beautiful image like that. I do delve into some of that information in my book, The Shroud of Jesus, but we can't get into it here. It's just a little too complex. But so as far as the image is concerned, it is absolutely unique. And as far as the blood marks, is truly blood. It's been discovered to be blood. I knew Alan Adler. He and I were good friends. He was a chemist. He was an expert in porphyrins, and porphyrins are the breakdown of blood cells and whatever. And so he discovered indeed that there was blood in this cloth. It's certainly that of a human, because it's a human body that was crucified. You can see that very, very straightforward. So it's the real thing. I actually started as a skeptic and did not. I didn't know, having my faith. I really didn't care about the shroud, but when I was interested, sort of academically, but I was very much a skeptic until I came across a blood mark that convinced me 100% that a crucified man was buried in this cloth. And that's what kept me going all these years. And it's been a great adventure of discovery, finding out more and more about these blood marks and how real they are, and how that this was truly a three-dimensional man under this cloth.
I would presume the blood, it would be impossible to get a DNA sample off of it. Not that you could match it to anything, but...
Right. So the whole thing is, no, people have really tried. The problem with DNA is that DNA has been contaminated by so many people whose DNA is on there as well. That's one of the major problems with trying to, get a good sample for DNA, and no one has really done that with regard to blood. Some people have proposed that they have done a DNA sample saying, well, this is a man, but that's pretty obvious. You can tell it's a man by just looking at the image. But that's about as far as, but that was not even an official study. And I don't even, that's sort of more hearsay, and I've never seen any real documentation on that. But that's sort of the hearsay among the Shroud people, you might say.
Well, now, given the, you mentioned that you were a skeptic initially, and, a lot of skeptics have a lot of different ideas about the Shroud, and, one of the arguments always involves like the carbon dating of the Shroud. But the issue there is that you mentioned there had been a fire, and I guess other pieces of cloth have been used to repair the Shroud. So it's not exactly a pristine original copy even now. Not copy, but a pristine original Shroud to this day, correct?
Well, what we have, you're correct about, definitely about this carbon dating. It was very interesting in 1988, the carbon dating of a few patches, small patches from one of the corners of the Shroud were taken, and it was sent to 3 different labs, and they came up with a date between around 13th, 14th century, and they said, well, it's a 13th or 14th century artifact. However, they took the samples in an area that had been held by people for 2,000 years. You can see the sort of the darkness from the soiled area. That the corners are dark because they were held at the corners. And people don't realize that when you want to do carbon dating, you don't ever even touch the item that you're going to carbon date. You put it in tin foil, and then you're very careful not to even touch it. So can you imagine a hand held by many hands in oily hands and so forth over the centuries, was really soaked into the fibers of these corners, and that's it was a corner where the sample was taken, and plus the fact that the study had been reviewed again in a study came out in about 2019, stating that they finally got all the original data on the study that they did, the 3 labs, and they found out that the study demonstrated that their numbers were not homogeneous. In other words, they were too scattered. Therefore, that particular carbon dating should be considered something not really telling us the age of the cloth. That was a very interesting work that was done. There's a good. I have the article. It's referred. It's referenced in my book, The Shroud of Jesus. But moreover, there are other things that tell us more about this cloth with regard to time, place, and person, and I'd like to just mention a couple of them. First of all, there's the pollen studies. I met Dr. Max Fry back in 1978 when I was first in Turin as a young man, and there he had personally told me he had spent 5 years studying these pollen spores. That's the dust in the cloth. It's the pollen, that green stuff on cars, during the spring and so forth that you see. And those spores got onto the cloth and provided an itinerary to where this cloth had been. So he had found pollen spores, of course, from France and Italy, but more so and more of them from Anatolia and especially from Palestine, from the Jerusalem area. So we know that the cloth had a pre-13th century life, and it was all the way, and it brings us all the way back to Jerusalem. Now that's place, and there's another study that's biological, and that's place. Now there's an archaeological information that's very interesting as well regarding time and place, and that is that there's a long strip that runs along the entire cloth, and that strip is the same material as the cloth itself. So therefore, that strip, for whatever reason, had been cut off and sewed back onto that cloth. People have ideas of why that was done, but I won't go into that. But what it is that the textile expert, Fleury Lemberg, who I met in 2010 at her home in Bern, Switzerland, she discovered that the stitch, she's the one that repaired the shroud in 2002. In other words, now the shroud they took out the patches, the old patches and the old backing of the cloth and put on a new backing. And she was the one that did that work. Well, I spent a day with her, and she discovered that there was a stitch that was used that stitched that strip to the cloth, and that stitch was unique in the world. The only other place where they found a stitch like that was in Masada. Now, Masada is about a 2.5-day walk from Jerusalem, and not only that, it's 2000. So we have that Masada was destroyed in 74 AD. So we have sort of a time and place whereby a unique stitch done by an individual or a few individuals at least in a certain area existed. And so we know that the likelihood is that the cloth was in the Jerusalem area before 73 AD when Masada was destroyed. So we have time and place there with an archaeological fact. And finally, just recently, they did what they call it's an X-ray scattering test that they look at the deterioration of the cloth itself, and they find that the older it is, it has a certain pattern of deterioration the cellulose does. And they matched that cellulose. They tested the cloth in Masada to the shroud, both of them being linen, and they found that there was a match to this 2,000-year-old cloth in Masada to the shroud. So that's really great evidence from a sort of a scientific X-ray perspective. So we have a lot of data telling us the time and place, and then of course, as far as person is concerned, we have the passion, and we have the story of John that really gives us our let's say our fitting it into the Bible of who that person is. And one of the wonderful things I've had the opportunity to do is I've been studying, as I was studying the cloth over these years, was that I made a discovery that I was, let's put it this way, for all my adult life, I believe that the man of the shroud is a man that's lying on his back, and that basically the blood studies are consistent with that. You're consistent with a man who is crucified. That man was then taken down, and he was laid on a cloth, and then the other end of this cloth was laid over his body, and those blood marks are consistent with a man who was crucified and buried. However, over time, I discovered that the image itself is not that of a man who is lying in burial, but that of a man who has been lifted up. And that, when I discovered that, that was sort of an epiphany for me, because then I felt, well, that's the moment of the resurrection. And all that information on how I discovered that is in my book, The Shroud of Jesus. I can talk a little bit about it, but one has to see the photographs to really appreciate how true and how real that is.
Well, I want to ask about the image kind of from a different angle as well, because when you were on the show the last time, right before you got cut off, actually, I wanted to ask about one of my favorite theories by those who are skeptics of the shroud. You know, you can be skeptical of the shroud and just like blow it off or whatever, but I like an alternate theory that itself is actually also a fascinating thing to think about. And my favorite alternate theory has always been that the image on the shroud is actually Da Vinci, and he had found a way to do photography hundreds of years before it was invented, and that's what the image was. So this was a theory that people had to explain it, and obviously you would disagree with that, but I guess the question to you, besides telling us a little bit about that particular theory, is could this be somehow a photographic representation of Jesus or whoever it ends up being that was somehow put on this through some, I guess, process we're unaware of? Because it is a negative.
Yes, it is. It's a photograph. Who's kidding who? No, it's a photograph. It's a very ancient photograph. Absolutely. Now, as far as Leonardo da Vinci, the timing is not good because of his birth, as opposed to when the shroud was in Europe, you know, in Leary, France, in 1350. So you've got a shroud with an image before he was kicking around and doing such amazing things, which he probably never did.
There is a timeline discrepancy there, one way or the other. But it is essentially. It's a very interesting theory, but the timing is off. You know what I'm saying? Yes. Now, you know,
it's an impossible situation. In other words, your theory is, as much as I would like to respect your theory, which is, I think, it's fascinating, of course, but it's as far as timing, it doesn't work.
Now, I think that you had mentioned last time, you know, everyone has seen the image, which is, as you've noted, it's like it comes across better in a negative than when you actually look at it. When you actually look at the shroud, it's a very, very faint image. But when you look at the negative, it just kind of pops out at you because it's the negative. So I think you had mentioned, is it true there's an image on the front and the back?
Well, let's be very careful in what we're saying here, okay? When you mean the front and the back, it's true you see a front image and a back image of the man of the shroud. However, that's because of the length of the cloth. So the cloth is 14 feet long, so his body was laid out on one end of the cloth, and the other end was placed over his body. So you get the back and the front image, okay, of a man, okay? So you are getting the back and front image of a man, but the image does not go through to the other side of the cloth. Okay, we have to.
I see. Okay,
to
so
make it clear.
Yeah, so he.
Yeah, you have a back and front image, but they're all on the same side of the cloth. They're not on the other side of the cloth.
Okay.
Because I try to make that clear, was the fibers that cause the image are just less than half the diameters of the hairs on your head, and it's only the one fiber deep. It doesn't go to the back of the cloth at all. I mean, it just stays right on the super surface of the one side of the cloth.
Okay, I'm looking at
the blood goes through to the other side, though.
Okay.
It soaks through to the other side.
Okay, well, that's interesting that the image does not soak through, but the blood does.
Right. This is a very difficult thing to do, to try to describe all of this without photographs, of course. If people want to see photographs, they can go to our website, shroudphotos.com, shroudphotos.com. It's a Vern Miller website, and he and I were good friends, along with Tom DiMohala. But Vern Miller was the man in 1978 who was he was a scientific photographer that did the photographs in the shroud. And you can go to that website, shroudphotos.com. Tom DiMohala and myself put that whole thing together after Vern died. About 4 years after Vern died, Tom had the photographs, and I helped Tom, and he and I worked together to create shroudphotos.com, so everybody in the world could look at the most magnificent pictures you've ever seen of the shroud. And the resolution is so good that you can go and actually make a copy of those and put it on in your living room, and it's for free. You can go download that for free, and then have a photograph made and put it in your home. And I invite anybody to do that. There are rules if they want to do other things. They can't put those pictures on other websites without permission. But you can put them in a book, or you can put them in your home or whatever. So they can see a lot of the photographs that we're talking about, and blood marks and so forth. It's all there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the full-length photos right now, and I mean, I've known of the Shroud of Turin for like decades, obviously, but like everything I've ever read about it, you always just see the front image, and you rarely see the back image. This is like the first time I've ever seen the back image as well. It's fascinating. There's the front and the back.
That's right. There's a front image and the back. Now let me go through this with you again, because I think this is very important. It comes down to, you'd say, why do I emphasize that the man of the shroud is upright? Okay, that's a really incredible phenomenon that has not been understood before, but it's very well understood now once you understand the anatomy of the body and the hair and so forth. You see that the man of the shroud is upright. And I'd like to, and you just brought up a major point, that nobody pays attention to the back of the shroud. Well, we did. I worked with a master of art anatomy for 3.5 years. We took measurements of the blood marks, the image itself, and measured and remeasured and is a very close three-dimensional image of the man of the shroud, front and back. Now, what's important here from the point of view, when you see, so we have a, actually, this particular sculpture now, you can see it in two different places. It's in St. John Paul II National Shrine in Washington, D.C., the St. John Paul II National Shrine in Washington, D.C. And also you can see it at Ave Maria University in Ave Maria, Florida, which is near Naples. And and also we have a full exhibit here in Ave Maria telling the entire story of this. And there's going to be another exhibit in Washington, D.C., the second exhibit, Washington, D.C. during Lent on the upright man of the shroud, the raised man of the shroud. And of course, it's a beautiful exhibit because St. John Paul II is the one who he's done a beautiful pastoral on the shroud in 1998, and that runs through the exhibit as well as my work with regard to the anatomy, blood marks, and so forth, and the understanding that the man of the shroud is upright. So let me get back to the back again. That most people, when you go see in exhibits around the world, they have Jesus lying down, and I thought he was lying down until I discovered that indeed he was upright. Before other people, a physician actually pointed this out to me before I realized it, and I didn't pay any attention to him. So the bias to think that he's lying down is very powerful. In fact, it took me 7 years to realize that he was right. And so he was an orthopedic surgeon. He was in his 60s. I met him when I was in my 30s. And so he saw this. He says, this man looks like he's upright as if he's suspended in midair. That was his words. And I paid no attention to him for 7 years. But then I discovered that these following things, as far as the back is concerned, which no one pays attention to, when you look at the back, you see that the hair flows down beautifully, just like a man is upright. And also the back of the man has form. And what happens with gravity, we have to think in terms of gravity. Gravity takes hair and it causes it a long hair. It just falls a certain way if you're upright as opposed to lying down. Would you agree?
I would agree with that, yeah.
And also what happens if you're sitting down, your buttocks is going to be flattened as opposed to when you're standing up when it's rounded, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's when, in a sense, that and I was 24 years old when I realized this, but when I was turned over the cadaver that I was studying, I was shocked. We found the whole back of the body flat. So anyway, we did a study and just showing a man upright and comparing him to a man lying on glass. And if you look up to, let's say in other words, he's lying on glass and you're below him looking up, you see that his back, a lot of his back is flattened out. His buttocks and some of the, gastrics of his legs, his lower legs, whatever, are flattened out because of the weight of the body. And when you look at the shroud, there is no flattening, there is form. The body is not flattened out. The body is in form as if he were upright. That's one thing. Of course, then the hair falls down to the back nicely, and it also falls down to the shoulders. And if otherwise, it would sort of fall back. Even if it were bloody, whatever, it would still fall back because of the weight of the blood, whatever. Maybe stiff, but it would fall back. And the other thing that I discovered, realized, is that negatives have shadows on them. They have positive and negative. And so we found out that the shadows on this man, his face, under the pectoral muscles in the hands and so forth, they show shadows of a man that's not lying down, but is upright. In other words, the body, again, when the shadows that are cast on a person, let's say with light coming from above, there's virtually no shadows on the body when he's lying down. But when he's upright, there are shadows around the eyes, under the nose, and it's, which you see every day. It's sort of a normal thing. And you remember when you were a kid, and maybe I don't know if you ever did this, but you put a flashlight under your face,
Oh, yeah.
and you sort of look like a monster, because of the shadows and the.
Yeah.
Because we're not used to that. It looks like you're a monster. But we see the shadows that come from above, and we don't think we're a monster because that's what we normally see all the time. So that's what you see in the shroud. You see these shadows of a man that's upright as opposed to him lying down. So there's three things: light, showing the shadows, and then gravity that shows the hair falling down, and then gravity that has plays an enormous part on the form of the body. It's different from a man who's lying down as opposed to a man who's upright. Then that's what it's that study that tell us that this man is upright, and his one foot is crossed over the other, and so he's not standing. It's as if he's lifted up, and that becomes very important from the point of view of what I discovered with regard to the Gospel of John. Not only are the blood marks there that tell us that John saw this cloth, but he ingeniously tells us that he did indeed see this cloth. We don't have enough time to get into all those details. The book goes into it in great detail, but it actually tells us that this upright man, I'll summarize it by saying, when Jesus went to, do you remember this? I don't know if you're, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the story of Jesus cleansing the temple.
Yes.
It's in chapter 2 in the Gospel of John. He goes in and he says, he makes a whip and turns over the money tables and all of that. And the Jews ask him for a sign. And he says, and they say, and I always thought my entire life that they asked him for a sign because he was disturbing the economy of the system and causing a mess as far as the money changers and all of that. But that's not the real reason why they asked him for a sign. They asked him for a sign because his statement was, "Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." And so what he said, he was calling God his Father. He was calling himself the Son of God. And that was considered blasphemy. And we find out in chapter 5, he uses the same words, "my Father's house," and they want to kill him for blasphemy. So the real reason why they wanted a sign was because he was claiming to be the Son of God. And he does this for the first time early on publicly in chapter 2 of the Gospel of John. So Jesus responds to that request for a sign, and he tells them what the sign is that will tell them in the world that he's the Son of God. And what does he say? He says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And it, John, is really his body. John explains that he was talking about the temple of his body. So when he says that, in other words, when you look at the shroud, that's exactly what you're looking at. You're looking at a destroyed body who has been raised up. That's exactly what you're looking at. So that's the sign that tells the world that Jesus is the Son of God. And that's a very important part of the book, and it's all related to in the last 6 chapters of the book.
Well, we're running low on time here, but I do want to get a chance to talk about the book as well as the websites. There is a photo here at shroudstudies.org. If you go to the exhibit area, you can see a photo of the bronze sculpture, the 3-dimensional replica of the image of the man on the shroud. That's up at shroudstudies.org. And also up there is a link to shroudphotos.com, which Dr. Lavoie was talking about. You can go up there and click on the gallery button. And all sorts of photos of the shroud are available for you to download. And let's talk a little bit about the websites and the book before we wrap it up today.
Okay, the book was published by Sophia Institute Press in 2023. It's gotten some wonderful endorsements, people like Scott Hahn, Mike Aquilina, Father Jürgen Lias. These are all scholars, biblical scholars, who've given me wonderful endorsements on the book, and also it's doing very well. People, it's a short read. It has about 80 pages of 80 photographs. What I talk about is what you can see. You can decide for yourself what the shroud is by looking at the photographs and understanding and reading what I have to say about them, and make up your own mind, which, you know, regarding this particular conversation that we just had about the upright man and what it means. The book is available on Amazon, and it's, of course, it can be ordered from any bookstore. And it's a fun read. It's a detective story. I spent a lifetime, over 40 years, putting it together, and it's been looked at by many people, and we've gotten good praise by real scholars for it. So it's I have to say that I like to recommend my own book.
Well, yeah, that's what you got to do. The full title is The Shroud of Jesus and the Sign John Ingeniously Concealed. And it is available at Amazon.com, Sophia Institute Press. There's a list of endorsements here. All of this is up at shroudstudies.org. There's a link to Instagram, Facebook. There's a link to shroudphotos.com. So shroudstudies.org is where you want to go, and it'll basically give you information on everything we talked about here today. So I want to thank you so much for doing the show today. I very much appreciate it, and maybe we can do this again someday.
Well, that would be great. I want to thank you very much for your time and your interest, and for what you do. I very much appreciate that. It's very kind of you, and it's wonderful to see people like yourselves that out there looking for answers to phenomena that are out there in the world, and looking for the truth. I think the main thing is the truth.
Well, thank you so much for doing the show. I really appreciate it. And, of course, everybody, thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next time, After Dark Radio.